You're listening to Tabletop Arcanum, a podcast dedicated to learning and exploring the hobby of tabletop gaming. Your hosts are Justin Taylor and Richard Geese, so sit back and relax as we talk, discuss, and joke our way through the hobby we love so much.
Craft your hero, choose your path, claim your destiny. Call to Adventure is a tabletop game in which players compete to craft the hero with the greatest destiny. Play cards to build your character, cast runes to face challenges, and choose whether to follow a path of heroism or villainy. Play competitively, solo, or co-op. Welcome to Tabletop Arcanum. We're your hosts,
Justin
and Ricky. And this week, we are doing quite a bit.
Got a review for a Call to Adventure. Adventure is calling. Collect. Will you accept the charges?
1-800-CALLATT. Yes, I will.
Fair.
And we also have a interview in our Kickstarter Corner.
This is true.
So we got to speak to Cass from
Tomb Guardians.
Tomb
Without further ado, let's do a roll recap and talk about what games we've been playing since we last recorded. I will go first. Really, the thing we've been playing mostly is Call to Adventure. I've played a bunch of it since recorded, and in the last couple of weeks, because since I was a backer, I got it pretty early, so one of those things I was able to pre-play a bunch of games before we started really digging into the review. So, with the Phoenix trip, didn't get to play too much, and realistically, it was a little bit of Game of Thrones, the card game, another session of Gloomhaven, a little bit of Arkham Horror, the card game, LCG, which I have to tell you, we had to redo the scenario. We weren't good enough in the one that we played that it actually told us, you go to sleep, you have to do it again tomorrow. Next week, we should be playing that again. Been playing a lot of Call to Adventure because of the review, and since I got it recently, it's also kind of that new hotness thing I've been messing around with. And then got to try another Kickstarter game called Drawing Dead, which was open face poker, but you got to screw with each other's cards. Like, I had powers and stuff that I could play to, like, have everyone remove their a card out of their hand of their choice, or you got to take cards from each other.
Interesting. And
if you had the highest hand with a full go round around the table, you won the pot. And there was you had to have $40 at the end to win. So it was fun.
This makes me think it's a game that you would find in the casino that the Griswolds went to in Vegas Vacation. Nice.
What about you?
Well, I played Call to Adventure.
Shocking.
We're going to be reviewing it, so definitely got in on that. So we played Betrayal Legacy, and now that we've gotten we were games 6 and 7 or 7 and 8.
We were already halfway. That was 8 and 9.
That was 8 and 9. So we got through 8 and 9, and the games are starting to. Are you sure those are 8 and 9?
It was Chapter 7 and Chapter 8. It was games 8 and 9 because the prelude is actually 0.
Okay, that makes sense. So we did play
there's
that.
There's 13 chapters total, but there's 14 games because 0 is the official one. I only know that because we were officially halfway through it when we started.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. They are taking a little bit longer. There's more tiles, more cards, more things to get through. Mm-hmm. So it was definitely longer sessions.
Yeah. And then we had a good old 5th edition hold us over through part of our time away from the mics. So we had an eventful few weeks. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to just jump straight into the news before we get to our Kickstarter Corner.
As is our usual customary, yes.
Since everything was announced right before we recorded our last episode with Gamma, we don't have too much. I do know that Plaid Hat has announced that they will be releasing Abomination: The Heir of Frankenstein. It's a worker placement 2 to 4 player competitive game. You essentially just take the role of a scientist working to complete the work of Dr. Frankenstein. So it does look like it's going to be a little fun. Interested to see reviews, everything when that starts coming out. The other thing, Star Wars Outer Rim, Fantasy Flight Games has announced that they are putting out a game mat for it. It looks pretty solid. I'm excited for it. I definitely will be picking that up when I pick up the game, just to add a little extra razzle dazzle to it.
Yeah, it's a good idea for that. And then before we dive into our Kickstarter Corner, we also went to Adepticon over the weekend.
Yes, we did.
Because that is in our backyard, so it was nice and easy to kind of drop in and visit it. Adepticon is in Schaumburg, Illinois. Every year it's a big Warhammer 40K, Warhammer Fantasy, Warhammer Age of Sigmar. Tabletop miniatures is where Adepticon really came from. But they have, over the years, expanded. Fantasy Flight had their presence there with X-Wing tournaments, Legend of the Five Rings tournament, Star Wars Armada, and Legion. Because now that's a tabletop miniature game, so obviously they had Legion there. Keyforge also made a tour stop there, so they're doing the big vault tour, and they had a stop over at Adepticon. So primarily we didn't actually go see, and I had a couple buddies playing in a team tournament, so I went and checked in on them, and really just kind of saw what Adepticon was about, because I wasn't necessarily into the tabletop game, so I never really visited it until this year.
Yeah, and unfortunately for people like me, you're required to have your army painted before you can participate in any of the games. So for Kickstarter Corner, we have a little treat. We did get to talk to Cass Suwinski from Tomb Guardians. Mm-hmm. We got to interview him earlier this week, so we are going to check in on that interview.
So this is our Kickstarter Corner, and we have a special guest with us this episode. We have Cass Suwinski from Tomb Guardians.
Hi, Cass. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, guys, for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming on.
Right. So, Cass, why don't you introduce a little bit of who you are, so that our listeners can at least get an idea of who you are, and then we'll kind of dive into why you're talking with us today.
Oh, that's great. Again, my name's Cass Suwinski. I'm the owner of Tomb Guardian Miniatures, located in Columbus, Ohio. The project actually started with my son and my wife, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but that's actually what prompted me to get into the business after role-playing many, many years of my life.
Okay. So how long have you been in the hobby then? If it's been many years, are we talking first edition Dungeons and Dragons? Are we talking second ed?
I've been wow, probably it'd be first edition, because I started role playing back in the mid '80s. So
okay,
it would be first edition, and role played and D&D with my classmates in high school, and then in college, and after college, and just kept on going, and still do it to today.
Yeah, you know what? Honestly, that's kind of my story too. I started when I was in high school, and haven't stopped. So the games have changed, the players have changed, but no, I still do it.
The hobby's still great. Yeah.
It is. It's a great hobby, and it's one with the computer generation and the phone generation that takes a little bit of your imagination away from actually playing on a computer versus doing a role-playing game, and that's what I enjoy, the imagination that goes into a role-playing game.
Definitely. And you were saying that, it popped in my mind, like, I am actually, because of life and things, how people move around and stuff like that, like, technology is also allowing us to keep playing for people who move away. I don't know. Have you tried that before?
Actually, we have. I have some good friends. Well, they're all over the place, but
right.
They live in Connecticut, Colorado, and of course I'm in Ohio. We try to get together every other week or every third week to get together and just do a role playing session. Yeah, online through Roll20.
Yeah,
oh,
that's what I was thinking. I'm in a Roll20 game myself, because it's like my group's like you, across 4 states. We all grew up in the Illinois area where I'm from, but life took us all in different directions. So it's neat where I totally agree. Being at the table is one experience, but being able to use that technology to kind of bring that back and keep those connections is always fun too.
Yeah,
So,
that's exactly right. I mean, kind of stinks that life has to get in the way of our role playing, but we all grow up and have kids and move off to different parts of the country. And actually, one of my best friends, he lives in Switzerland, so he gets involved every now and then too. So,
assuming when the time zones line up right.
Well, I don't know if it ever lines up right because he's 7 hours ahead of us, but he does DM for us, so he will stay up to wee hours in the morning for the party. And actually, he's one of my partners in this process that we're going to talk about today.
Awesome, cool.
Awesome.
So let's talk a little bit. Is there a particular favorite game that you have?
I like a lot of things. I mean, if I had to pick one favorite thing, if it was a game, it would be. I love sports, so I've always been involved in sports. My children are involved in sports.
Cool.
In the game industry, like I said, I like to role play. I like board games. Our latest board game that the family's playing, or me and my son's playing, is Gloomhaven. We love that game, and it just takes a lot of space and a lot of time to play it.
Yes, I've got a small group doing a Gloomhaven campaign right now. We're like maybe 5-6 scenarios in, and it just is not going to end, and we're not going to get through it in any reasonable amount of time, but we're enjoying a lot of it. So, So let's talk a little bit about Tomb Guardians here next. And so what's the origin of Tomb Guardians? You kind of alluded it started with your wife and kids. Where did the company kind of formulate from there?
Well, like I said, I've played D&D my whole life, and through the years, there's a convention here in Columbus, Origins. Many of us are familiar with that, and I've run a role-playing dungeon crawl adventure at that convention over the years. And over the years, it's got a larger and larger crowd that's wanted to play. And my son is now 12, and last year after the convention, he came home and told my wife how much of a success it was and how many people wanted to play. And my wife then said, hey, why don't you write the rules and publish your rules if it's that successful and people like to play it, and that's something you've always wanted to do. And it was something I've always wanted to do. It's kind of like what we were talking about. Life gets in the way, and you always have something else you want to do. So at that point, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to sit down and write the rules for the game. So I sat down, unbeknownst to myself, not knowing how difficult it is to write a set of rules and how much actual time it takes. And boy, it takes a long time to write a set of rules because you have to start from the basics, basically starting where nobody knows anything about your game. So I started writing the rules, and during that process, my wife said, well, do you have miniatures that go along with the game? And I was like, no, I just generally use what's on the market or the miniatures that I have, because I've got quite a collection myself, just like most people do.
I was going to say, yeah, you've been playing since the 80s, so if you don't have a giant pile of minis somewhere.
I've got more unpainted lead than I have got painted. I've got a whole closet dedicated to it.
I think it's for people who've been in the hobby as long as we have. That's kind of a given, because it all rolls back to time of, man, that mini looks cool. Let's get that. I'm going to paint that someday. And then like the second, third, fourth, 10th, 20th mini shows up after it, and you still haven't painted that first one.
Oh, absolutely. And not only do I do fantasy, I also do historical Civil War and World War II. And I've got a vast collection. I tease my son all the time. I was like, you see that closet? That is your unpainted collection that you're going to get when I pass away someday. He's like, what am I going to do with that? I was like, paint it. So during the going back
start
to
now.
My wife, I'm sorry.
He can start painting it now and get ahead of the game.
Exactly. He lets dad paint all this stuff. So she said basically. So she asked, and I was like, no, I don't have my own set of miniatures for our game. So she's like, well, why don't you do that? And I was like, well, it costs a lot of money. and she's like, well, if that's a passion of yours and that's something that you want to do, why don't you look into it? So that's essentially what I did. So I reached out to some friends in the industry. They got me in touch with Fortress Miniatures, Ben and Jeff. And Ben and Jeff, spoke with them, and they're two real nice guys. They essentially got a hold of some sculptors for me, and to see if they would even be interested in talking with me, and they were. So I sat down and through many phone calls, spoke with Jason Weeby and Bobby Jackson, which are two of our sculptors now, and I told them what I wanted in regards to a miniature and what my sights were and what my goals were for a miniature line, and if they would be interested in helping create my vision. And they were, which was awesome because they're two of the best sculptors in the world. And most of the people know those two because they produce miniatures for Reaper and WizKids. So, so as I was writing the rules, we decided in July of last year, we're gonna launch a set of miniatures and kickstart those miniatures in the late fall. So the first set was a group of dwarves and monsters that we released last fall.
Nice. And then, so Kickstarter was kind of your vehicle because it wasn't necessarily the passion or the ability, because you found really, really talented sculptors to work with you. It was just more of a, hey, I need to be able to do this financially. And then that's kind of the beauty of crowdfunding then.
Right. And, Kickstarter is a great platform, and I've never did a Kickstarter before. I've never tried to launch a project on Kickstarter. And boy, did I learn a lot on the first Kickstarter campaign. It's the old adage, what you don't know, you really don't know. And that's so true. Unfortunately, our first Kickstarter wasn't successful. The main reason is I set the goal for the amount of fund just way too high, and we raised a lot of money for our first Kickstarter. We almost raised $18,000 on our first Kickstarter.
Wow, that is
but I set the goal too high. I should have set it at $5,000 instead of $25,000, and we'd have been fine. So, fortunately, I canceled the campaign right at the end. And then we launched it on a pre-order basis right afterwards. And it was a very big success. And fortunately, it was a success. So that allowed us to then revamp and launch a second Kickstarter, which is going on actually right now, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Right.
The Valorous Vampires.
Excellent. So that's a really cool story. And I love the piece of like, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
Because I recently changed my day job, and for like the last 2 months, that's really what my catchphrase at work has been, is like, oh, do you know how to do this? Like, I don't know what I don't know. So by learning by that failure and taking it as like, you know what, it's a lesson learned. And then what you even said, like, hey, I set that pledge, that campaign goal too high. Looking at your new campaign, you already course corrected and made sure that you're not coming in too hot, so that you can actually get funded and make this project a success. So,
that's exactly right. And we had a lot of people, being that it was our first Kickstarter, we got a lot of advice from a lot of people, especially in the first campaign. We had a lot of pledge levels, and that was kind of hard for people to understand. So I very much simplified the pledge levels. There's 3 different pledge levels in this one to make it easy for people. And we learned a lot. We absolutely learned a lot. And we appreciate everybody's advice and help that they gave us.
Cool. That's awesome. So you, the new Kickstarter right now is the Queen of the Damned. What chose you to go with vampires this round?
That's a good question. The The Kickstarters we're doing, when we first launched, I'm going to take a step back here.
Sure.
That we launched the dwarves first and now vampires second. These projects are a smaller version of a big game we're going to release here later this fall, which is a role-playing and dungeon crawl adventure, kind of like the old D&D modules where you could go through a D&D adventure and go through a dungeon, have multiple levels. Now, our game's not going to be that complicated, but essentially you'll be able to pick a party of 5 characters, go through the first level, and as you go through the different levels, there are certain objectives that you have to accomplish. And by accomplishing that, you'll be able to increase your party's stats or individual stats, or find magic weapons, armor, gold, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
So the factions that we're releasing, there's 8 factions in our world for that game. And being that the dwarves and the vampires are 2 of those factions, the dwarves being a good faction, the vampires being an evil faction. The other faction, there's 6 other factions. The other factions, the good factions, are elves and templars. There's 2 neutral factions, the barbarians and a group of female Amazons. It's a group of 10 female Amazons. And then we have orcs and dark elves as being the 2 other evil factions. So that's the group of 8 factions for the particular game. And each faction will have their own set of miniatures and special abilities in the game. And everybody's a little bit different.
Okay, definitely.
Very cool. And then I also saw, jumping ahead, you do have the Amazons that are going to be on Kickstarter May 14th, something?
Well, we're planning the Patrick Keith is the sculptor actually for our female faction of Amazons.
Okay.
I think we're going to push that off a little bit till more the end of May, maybe beginning of June, but it'll be in that time frame. But that's the next Kickstarter that we're going to release, which will be a group of female Amazons, which will have 10 characters, and then monsters also. So
Nice.
a similar amount of miniatures. Will be right around 20 miniatures in that set also.
That's awesome.
Okay. And then
I do know we're a big fan of these are all metal figures too. Not only that, you threw you threw a guarantee on them for 5 years, was it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. One thing that, being that I've gamed essentially my whole life, I like the feel of metal miniatures. I like the weight.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the resin figures. I know that we have plans eventually to offer that, because there are people that like that feel.
True.
We offer, just right now, all our miniatures are spun cast in metal. We offer a 5-year guarantee. Is if you break one of my minis or one of our minis, all you got to do is mail it back to us, and we'll mail you a new one for free.
Like a sword or an arm falls off because they got banged up or something.
Yeah, if somebody breaks off a staff or breaks an arm, or takes off a head, all you got to do is mail it back to us, and we'll replace it for free. I mean, I feel that confident that our minis are very high in detail, very high quality miniatures. I know I met you guys at Adepticon this past week. And most of the people out there don't know who we are because we're relatively new. We only opened last July.
Right.
But it doesn't take long once you hold one of our minis in our hand and in your hand to see the quality and weight of our minis.
Right. And you say that because, we got in contact with you, and it was this nice, like, okay, I wanted to kind of see who you guys were too. And I was looking at these, the dwarf minis that you had already released and the vampire minis. I showed them to a couple of my friends who are big on the D&D minis line and went, hey, take a look at these. You've been doing minis a lot longer than I have. Give me some thoughts. And like everything I've heard is positive, like between the detail, the uniqueness of them. Because the one thing that kind of struck me is like, okay, I thought about it. I'm like, well, vampire's a vampire, but you've got a dozen vampires here.
Yeah, we have 10 different vampires in
10.
the set that And the reason there is 10 is when we release again our game, a individual that buys the faction will get a set of 6 miniatures. There'll be 4 additional miniatures they can pick up if they don't like one of the miniatures in the set. That say they don't like what the ranged character is, and he'd rather have, instead of a bowman, a crossbowman. So he'll be able to, or he or she will be able to pick up a crossbowman. But in this particular set for the vampires, we have Queen Valrith, which there's a story behind who Queen Valrith is. My wife has been a very large component and very strong supporter in this whole campaign vision of mine, and so I wanted to do something nice for her, and I asked her way back last year, hey, I want to maybe sculpt or have a figure made that represents you. What would you do? And she knew the factions, and she said, well, I want to be the head vampiress. So that's how, the Queen Valrith, the story behind it. Now, my wife, you have to understand my wife, she is not a board gamer. She is not a role-playing person. She thinks we're crazy when all my friends get together, but she will play board games with the kids. So the Queen's dress is actually sculpted after my wife's wedding dress when we got married. So the actual character doesn't look her, but the dress is actually sculpted. Jason sculpted her dress for the Queen. So that was pretty cool.
That is super cool.
And that was my thank you to her. The other characters in the group is, we have of course a Soul Reaper, which is the Necromancer. We have Cleric, which is Demetra the Hollow. We have one of my favorite characters, I think, in the whole group is, of course, besides my wife's character, is the anti-paladin we have here, which is Lothari the Death Hand. That's probably my favorite. He's an anti-paladin. He is a Templar anti-paladin. So if you notice, the vampires aren't run by a male vampire. It's run by a female household. So all the characters, the 3 top characters, the Queen, the Mage, and the Cleric are female characters. Everybody else is a male slave to them and serves her purpose. And then we have 2 grave spirits in the group, and then 4 male warriors: a barbarian, a Templar, an elf, and an orc male slave.
Okay. Yeah, like looking through it, like, yeah, you definitely have a matriarchal vampire society here.
So when it comes to all the minis, do you talk to the sculptors and say, hey, I'm kind of thinking I want like skeletons, and just let them run crazy? Or do you go to them and tell them, I kind of like this kind of style, I like the way that this looks, can we sculpt something that looks similar? Or how's that creative process go for them?
Well, the sculptors I have, I'm fortunate in the regards that I tell them my vision or what I'm looking for, and they take the ball essentially and run with it. I'm like, again, an old time gamer. I like the old Ralph Partha look, the old D&D miniature look, and that's pretty much what you'll see with our dwarves and our monsters and our vampires. It's not the modern aged look creatures or characters out there. I want the more the old style look. So I've expressed that to all our sculptors, and Bobby and Jason have done a really good job. So I will tell them that, hey, like this particular Kickstarter, I'll tell them, I told Jason, these are the particular characters that I have. This is what I'm looking for. But I don't direct them how to sculpt the figure. I mean, they are so good at what they do and their creativity.
Okay.
I don't want to interrupt in that. That's their job.
So, more of like, hey, the vampire cleric is going to be female, maybe staff wielder, and then you just let them run from there.
Yeah, actually, that was a good point. The only thing, for speaking of the cleric, is I told Jason, I was like, Jason, the cleric needs to be a female. I want her to have long hair, and I need something to represent a moon on her body or on her staff, because in our game there are 3 different moons in the game that affect each faction based upon if the moon is in rising or falling. Okay. And I'm not going to get into the rules, but in this particular case, the vampires follow the black moon or the dark moon. And on her staff, if you look at her staff, where he put the moon is right at the top of her staff. Mm-hmm. So I had, of course, our professional painter, which is Mary Prophet, paint that particular moon black, and so it sticks out.
Oh, that's
pretty cool. Yeah. So the other thing, Cass, is I know we've been talking about the Kickstarter here, but looking through the Tomb Guardian site, there was also, you had your dungeon tiles too. Mm-hmm. Which I gotta say, I don't know if I've ever seen dungeon tiles that are in the sense of non-standard dungeon types. Or at least they're hard to come by. I was like, oh, what are dwarven tiles looking like? And I was like, wow, that's awesome.
We were geeking out.
We offer the dungeon tiles. I can't claim that those are our dungeon tiles. We are authorized to sell those dungeon tiles. Those are absolutely Dragonlock's dungeon tiles, but we're authorized to sell them, and they got some great tiles that we offer. Now, saying that, with the game that we are releasing in the fall, we are currently in the midst of designing our own dungeon tiles to go with the adventure. So the first adventure that you're going to go through for the module is a lost, forgotten dwarven mine. So I have Ian Lovecraft. You probably saw maybe his Kickstarter that was out there. That he did great on his last Kickstarter. But he's helping us create the dungeon. So we'll be able to, when a player plays the adventure, they'll be able to purchase an entire set of dungeon tiles to fit the theme of the dungeon. So when they go through the first level, they'll be able to break it down and then play level 2, 3, 4, 5, and down to 10, with the one set of dungeon tiles that they purchase. So they don't have to buy multiple sets or multiple collections to play every level of the dungeon. Once you buy one, you'll be able to break it down and play it for the second, third, fourth level, and so on. And the game's also set up so it'll only take you 2 or 3 hours to go through each level of the dungeon. So it's not one of these campaigns that takes 4 years or 2 years to play. It's actually a game where you could sit down with your friends and play it in a night, and then break it down, come back later and play again.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Okay. So so the Kickstarter is still going live now. When is that going to end?
We end here in 13 days on the 14th, midnight on the 14th. We hit our first stretch goal the other night. We're approaching the second stretch goal now, which is at the $9,000 level, which is a set of 3 coffins. The next stretch goal is the skeletal bowman, and give a little bit of hint for people out there. We're going to announce it here in the next day or two. I don't know if you saw our figures, but we have a Lich Queen in the collection, and we've snuck her out a little bit and tease people on when people want to know when that's going to be released, but it's coming very shortly. That's one of the coolest figures that is in this collection. Besides the vampires, the stretch goals, she's a really cool figure.
Right. And then looking at it, you got a couple add-ons too.
Yeah, we have a mausoleum add-on that people can add on to, and we also have a set of 3 zombies for $18 or $3 a fig, and then we also have a sarcophagus. I think it's like $7 or something per sarcophagus. What I wanted to do, I just didn't want to offer people just miniatures in the campaign or in this campaign. It's when you play, and you guys know this, when you play a campaign or D&D, it's more than just the miniature. It's the theme and it's the settings behind the game that you're playing. And I wanted to get some other accessory pieces that fit the theme.
Right, and that seems to be, you're striking each piston here is. I've looked through the Kickstarter and I see like it drips theme throughout the entire process. All the minis have a similar feel. Your professional painter did a really good job of like making sure the color schemes are nice and blended together. So when you put them together, you got your collection pictures and they just look like they belong together.
Yeah, she does. Our painter, we use a number of painters, but they did a really, really nice job. I mean, I can't paint anywhere close to what they can paint, and it's scary how well some people can paint. It really is.
Yeah.
Mary paints a lot of our miniatures for us, for our showcase miniatures, and there's one in there. It's a serpent, and she painted it like an anaconda. And it doesn't sound hard. It doesn't sound like it's hard to imitate that paint scheme. And I have tried on now 6 different serpents by dry brushing it and airbrushing it, and I just can't do it. And I've tried, and it's frustrating. And so now they're all just one shade. That just ain't that way.
Oh yeah. And I've got to say, I mean, we got an up close look at the figures this past weekend, and I mean they're beautiful figures. I'm looking forward to hopefully snagging a few and being able to paint them. I mean, I know I'm not going to get anywhere near where they were in that case, but still, they were beautiful. So
yeah.
I appreciate that, guys. And you know what? I can't get anywhere close either. I can't, not even close. I given up trying.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, and that's, we were looking at like I don't know if you had the time to step away from your booth at Adepticon and take a look at like the painted cases for the competition models at all.
Yeah, I did it down those cases, and I'll tell you, they're just breathtaking.
Right.
The amount of work that they put into it, and they do, and I mean, I could spend weeks and not even come close to what they do in a couple hours. So it's breathtaking.
Yeah,
exactly. So it's one of the things I love about this hobby is like you can get all sorts of walks of life into it based on like, you just like to paint stuff. Like, look at these beautiful minis that you can get and paint. Oh, and by the way, there's a game attached to it. Or, hey, here's a game. Well, if you want to try painting, go for it.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I have friends that play games and they don't paint their figures. They don't want to paint them. But you know what? It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter if you paint or not. What matters at the end of the day is, did you have fun? And
absolutely.
Did you have fun at the end of the day? And did you have fun with your friends? And that's essentially why I started this particular company. If somebody can have joy in my figures and in my products and our company's products, that's what I want. And that's the point. And if your figure breaks and you need to send it back to me, that's fine. I mean, send me back the figure and I'll replace it just so you can have the joy of playing with that figure that you like. That's the point.
Sounds good, Cass. So I think that's about all the questions that we had for you. Anything else you want to toss in related to the Kickstarter or in general? I think you really ended on a good note of just, it's all about having fun.
Yeah, no, I really don't. I appreciate you guys having me on. It was great meeting you guys. We'll be back at Adepticon next year.
Excellent.
We're going to be at Origins here in the middle of June. It's the Father's Day weekend. As long as my wife decides not to give birth on that week, I will be there. And if anybody is going to Origins, we are demoing our game all week that week.
Awesome.
So you'll be able to not only be able to play in the game and see our miniatures, but we also will have, you can look at what our dungeon tiles for the game are going to look like, because we're going to have the actual dungeon tiles there. So
Oh, very cool.
And then we're going to also be at, the company will be at Gen Con too, to perform at Gen Con and show our miniatures and sell our products there at Gen Con.
Excellent. Yeah, I don't think we personally have a plan to get to Origins because it's just we can only hit so many places in a year. But we will be at Gen Con.
Yeah, we'll definitely stop by and check everything out because you guys everything you guys have put out so far just looks amazing. So I can't wait to see what else you guys have coming.
Yeah, I mean, at Gen Con, here's a little kicker for you. We're hoping to release our Kickstarter right before Gen Con, so we're in the process of that now. So we can talk about that on another day.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
I appreciate you guys. I mean, I could talk for hours. I'm so passionate about it. I can talk about this for hours. But I know you guys are on a limited time frame. But I do appreciate you guys having me on.
Sounds good, Cass. Appreciate you coming on. Thank you very much for coming on after going through a 4-day con too. So I know what I was like after cons, any con I've been to. So my suggestion: rest up, feel better. Avoid that con crud if you can, and we'll talk to you in the future, and hopefully we'll just see you at Gen Con.
Absolutely.
And then when going to Origins, can visit you at Origins, and definitely I'll put the show notes today, the link to the Kickstarter. So if anyone's interested in backing your game or backing at least the Queen of the Damned, they can get on that and start following you for the next stuff. So thanks again, Cass.
I appreciate it, guys. Have a great night.
All right, we're back. So now to the nitty-gritty of
our review of Call to Adventure by Brotherwise Games. Call to Adventure was a Kickstarter last year. Happened around Gen Con time. Mm-hmm. They actually showed off their prototype at Gen Con, so we got to play it a little bit and actually went, okay, cool, this is what this game is about. So, boom, backed it and got this game. It's put out by Brotherwise Games, designed by Chris and Johnny O'Neill. So they're the brothers of Brotherwise Games. Brotherwise Games' other big project was Boss Monster. Mm-hmm. They've also done Unearthed, so they actually have a couple games under their belt now. And their designs are a little bit a step out of the ordinary. Mm-hmm. Call to Adventure at its roots is a fantasy-style hero crafting game where you kind of draft cards and build your little tableau worth of cards. Mm-hmm. And you get better as you go because they add more abilities, and then all of a sudden by the end you just kind of tally up your points and figure out what you've earned versus what someone else has earned. But the interesting twist is all of these cards are like little story elements, and you kind of build this story with this character, whether they're a hero, whether they're a villain. Tragic things happen in their lives, crazy romance or whatever. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a, you get a story out of it by the time you're done playing it. And while you're playing it, it's kind of building. You're kind of seeing like a early stages, like if we want to put it in a D&D setting, your low levels, your mid levels, and then your high level stuff. Mm-hmm. Because like your low level cards are like, oh, you're in a street fight. Mid levels, okay, now we're like imprisoned, or we're going to university or something like that, or discovering something mystical. And then the higher stuff, like, oh, now there's a demon army. We're unseating a queen. That's the basics of Call to Adventure. 1 to 4 player game, because there is a solo, and it's typically competitive, but there is a co-op version, which I'll let you speak more to, because you got to experiment with the solo mode a little bit better than I did. And then they recommend 13 plus, and it's more like icon knowledge and reading skills are needed for it. Their suggested play is 30 to 60 minutes. 2 players, that's pretty accurate. When you add a 3rd or 4th player, just because you're adding more turns, it grows a little bit longer. I was averaging about 90 minutes when it was a higher player count. Mm-hmm. But it scales very well from 2 to 4. You were our demoer for solo, so I'll let you speak to that in a moment. The one thing I do want to talk about the Kickstarter itself is don't really feel that you left out on much on the Kickstarter. Most of what the stretch goals were like extra story cards or extra origins and not much actual game mechanics. So there's a couple like exclusive cards, but they're not game-breaking ones. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I would say is there's a cloth bag that backers got that was for the runes. Really don't need it. A dice tray, something like that, works just fine. And we'll talk about the runes in a little bit here, because that's kind of one of the other unique things about the game. The upcoming expansions, because they're already kind of forward-thinking, they're getting major fantasy authors on board with this, and they actually got like 2 of my personal favorite ones. The first expansion is going to be named from the King Killer Chronicles, Name of the Wind, with the from Patrick Rothfuss, and be set in his world. The second expansion is from Brandon Sanderson's world, called the Stormlight Archives. So we're going to get flavor cards from those worlds, and you can actually craft stories based in these author worlds, opposed to the core box, which is a pretty generic fantasy world that they kind of just like threw together, because there's a king, there's a demon army, there's super generic. Every fantasy world pretty much has these base elements no matter what. It's like D&D on a plate. So initial thoughts when you open the box, presentation, what do you think?
Initial reactions for this, I do enjoy what they've done. Instead of putting dice or putting the normal type of things in the box that you expect from a board game. So it was refreshing. It was new. Mm-hmm. There is a lot to take in when you open up the box. There's a lot to take in going through the manual. I mean, I thoroughly enjoy. They really used all the space in this box too. So
right. So with when you have to make a test or make a challenge, you're actually throwing 2-sided runes. So they're kind of like dice, and that's one of my... It's a new tactile feel, yes, but realistically, they're just 2-sided dice. Mm-hmm. And you're throwing different versions of those, which give you a little bit different feel, which is all right. But with that, you're getting different combinations based on what skills and abilities you've already picked up, and that modifies your chances. And what it then tends to do is, if you're going down more evil, darker paths, or if you're going down mystical paths, you're going to get the mystic style, like intelligence or wisdom or charisma stuff. And then that's just kind of build and play and build into a more, this is what it designed to do. So you kind of only get better at the things that you're already doing. Mm-hmm. So if you have to shift gears, or like you said, when there's stuff out there and you're not really set up for that, it can really hinder you too. Mm. They do have a nice mechanic with the dark runes where you can tempt dark fate. You spend some of your experience points, which are also end game scoring points. But with those experience points, you're able to add these extra runes in there and kind of give yourself a little edge with a little bit of a risk. Mm-hmm. My initial thoughts is the presentation and art of this game is where it's really shining. Mm-hmm. All of the art is gorgeous. I can't really find a single piece or on a card that I'm like so on. There's a couple of the action cards, the hero or anti-hero cards, that I'm like, nah, it's okay. But that's only because I'm comparing it to the rest of the game. Mm-hmm. If it was like in any other game, it would be outstanding art. It just happens to be the weakest of the good art. The manual, you've already touched on it. You learn to play is a little bit tough. They did put out a updated version on Board Game Geek. This was one of those things that they added some clarity, made sure that things weren't contradicting, because there's a couple rules in the printed manual that were almost contradictory to each other if you didn't read them very, very, very carefully. Mm-hmm.
Also, like, Brotherwise has been really good about working, listening to the community, responding to the community. They're very engaged with everyone playing the game. Mm-hmm. I did like that someone put like a little cheat sheet out that he's been putting underneath his mats, and Brotherwise themselves retweeted it. So the moment I saw that, I downloaded that. I'm like, this is fantastic. It really helps out with me trying to play when I'm by myself.
Right. So I like the game a little bit better with higher player counts compared to lower player counts. Because I initially played it 1-on-1. It was all right. Mm-hmm. The one issue or slight issue with the game that I feel is there's really no catch-up mechanic if you fall behind the curve.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talk about that is in a multiplayer game, each turn you either can take what they call a talent card, which is essentially if you meet the prereqs of the card, you can just take it, add it to your tableau. If you don't have that or want to make one of the challenges, that's where you use the runes to test whatever skill that challenge is associated with. And if you pass, you grab it. If you don't, it gets discarded, you get an experience point, and you move on. The game is set up in like 3 phases. So there's Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Act 2 doesn't unlock until the first player who has 3 Act 1 cards starts their turn. Then Act 2 is unlocked and they get to build off Act 2. You're only limited is to 3 cards under any one act.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially you get first player to 9 cards is the one who sets the pace of the game. If I'm succeeding everything I'm trying to do and I don't screw up because I have the right choices, I make the right rolls, whatever, and you mess up something, you're now like a turn behind me.
Mm-hmm.
And if you become like 2 turns behind me, there's really no way, unless I screw up, for you to catch up.
I experienced this firsthand. I played with my girlfriend, informed me that this is in fact not Harry Potter. She was just nailing every single rune roll.
Mm-hmm.
So she got pretty far ahead of me. She ended up just whomping me because she just couldn't fail. And it got to the end of the game and she was well ahead of me and I struggled to get past Act 2.
So that would be my little bit of a design complaint on that particular feature is there's really no way for you to catch up if you fall behind like that. You're almost just hoping for them to screw up so that you have the chance to catch up. There is some anti-hero cards, which are kind of like your player interaction of like, oh, you've passed that? Well, I'm going to play this card and you have to redo it at a higher difficulty.
Mm-hmm.
But if you pass both times, now we're still where we were a moment before. Not necessarily a bad thing. I like the interaction between players in that. I just that catch-up mechanic isn't there enough for me.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, I don't know, it's just hard for me to get behind the fact that if a player screws up and isn't going perfectly, there's just no way for them to catch up or win. The uniqueness of the game, the flow, the fact that they got major fantasy authors on board is what's keeping me very highly engaged. Mm-hmm. The story element, the liveliness of the game of where you're actually crafting and it organically tells a story. And I haven't seen one yet that really just doesn't work. The one thing I would say personally is in the manual, it does say on your first play, just draw 1 origin, 1 motivation, 1 destiny card for every player. Where the regular rules, you get 2 and you pick. Mm-hmm. You get 2 of each, and then you pick which ones you're using. I would almost always tell people just deal out 2, because the problem is there are some of them that do not synergize together. Mm-hmm. They actually fight against each other, and if you are just bad luck and get those non-working combinations, you are going to be behind, and you're not going to have fun.
Mm-hmm. The level of gamer, and this is more geared towards, if anything, I would say it's someone who's played many different games, is willing to learn something on the fly. Someone who's played more than just Monopoly.
It's a midweight game.
Mm-hmm.
I would not put this in a heavyweight category. There's plenty of choices.
Mm-hmm.
I have played with a couple people who have been prone to analysis paralysis. It does hurt them because now they're looking at like 4 or 5 different cards and they have to try and decide. But I put it still in that medium weight category because as long as you're picking a card that's working towards your end goal, looking at what you have and kind of where you're missing, and you're doing well enough, those decision points are not going to be as impactful. How does solo mode work versus the regular game?
You essentially draw an adversary and you pretty much just play against yourself. So it's still very fun. I feel like playing solo, I got a lot more of a story for myself out of it versus playing co-op or competitively, because it was all about what I was doing by myself. Again, the one downside that I did have was I'm trying to build my character a certain way, but I can't do that with what's on the board in front of me. Mm-hmm. Now it's just me really trying to clear out the board so I can find something that will work for me. Your adversary is working just to get experience. So, they're working, and if they get more than 5 experience, they win.
Overall, final thoughts. I enjoy the game. It's a medium weight game. It's on the quicker side of things, so it doesn't take up a whole evening and allows you to play something else. Mm-hmm. But it's not too quick where the game's going to be over and then you're going to go, well, that was 15 minutes of fun. Mm-hmm. What's next? It does cover a lot of the elements that you like in a story-based game, a narrative-based game, with just enough choices where it seems to be interesting every time, and you're not just you're still trying to maximize, per se. I never saw myself trying to, this is going to make my story sound better. I've always played the game in such a way where I'm going after the thing that I can logically get based on the chances I have, or it's going to give me some points or something that is going to work out in the end. Mm-hmm. But they always have come up in this organic sort of, it does make sense for the story I was building. Mm-hmm. So I think that's the hidden beauty of this game, that the box and everything is not going to show you how elegant that piece of it is. Mm-hmm. So. And
that hits the nail right in the head. That is one of the best parts of it is, of all the cards that get laid out in front of you, it all works together. It all works with your origin, all works with your destiny. Mm-hmm. So it makes it seem like everything flows very, very nicely. And even if you fail, you failing that even sounds like it could be a legit part of your journey to your destiny. Mm-hmm. My overall thoughts on it, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would really like to play a game with more than 2 people.
Sure.
Just because it's going to give it a whole new dynamic.
So, nice thing is, Brotherwise did get the Kickstarters out first. So it is available for retail. Nice thing is, it is at that $40 price point. So it has a nice, easy, not these $50, $60, $70, $100, $150 games. Looking at you, Twilight Imperium. That have a high cost of entry. Low cost for medium weight game. Very good. So that's Call to Adventure. Definitely, I would say it's something to pick up and something to enjoy if you like the story crafting games or you like really great fantasy art. While it is out on retail, we are going to be doing a giveaway. Brotherwise Games did supply us with a retail copy to give away to our listeners. Keep an eye out on our social media.
We're going to post it on our Facebook, our Twitter, and our Instagram. We will have it up right after this episode is published. So if you're listening to this, definitely just go straight to our social media, whichever flavors you enjoy.
Next time on Tabletop Arcanum, we are going to review another game. You may have heard of it, Battle for Hogwarts.
Oh, I'm so excited.
So until then, this is Justin.
And this is Ricky.
Once again, thank you to Cass for our interview and talking about the Tomb Guardians. Make sure to remember to check out the Kickstarter. We'll have the link in the show notes. It should be still going on a little bit longer after about another week after we put this out, so you still have time to get in on that if that is something interesting. So, call to adventure, follow social media.
Follow social media.
I guess, maybe.
That's something. Your destiny. You are going to have to decide the journey on the way there.
Something, dark side. You've been listening to Tabletop Arcanum, hosted by Justin Taylor and Richard Geese, and featuring the original music by Paul Moore and Isaac Gilbert. You can follow us on most social media platforms. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts. As always, thanks for listening.